Cool, so hello everyone, my name is Jade, I'm studying radiography here at Curtin, and this is my project, Project 22, where we used enhanced visualization of, we created enhanced visualization of normal anatomy with augmented reality superimposed on the 3D models. Would you prefer I take my mask off? Okay, getting some confused looks. Okay, so understanding anatomy is essential for almost every healthcare profession. And learning about anatomy can be sometimes a lifetime affair for some anatomists. Experienced anatomists will spend years mastering their art. Usually, learning anatomy begins with exposure to videos and diagrams, but only so much can be taken from these tools. Then we have cadaveric specimens. So wet and plastinated models, which can be used to demonstrate more accurate human anatomy, because that's about as close as we can get to real-life, living human tissue. But that comes with a few problems. So storing and working with cadavers can be expensive. It requires licensing. There must be significant ethical considerations. It relies on bequeathment, and so cadavers aren't always available. And sometimes they just aren't available for people to use in their learning environment. So some universities even may not have access to cadavers. And because of the sensitivity to work with cadavers, students' learning experiences are not always the most interactive or immersive. So one way to overcome this is with a tool that I've created, or a tool that we've created, which enhances the visualization of anatomical structures with new technology. So this was my method. I was supplied with, is there a laser pointer? There it is. I was supplied with a high spatial resolution MRI dataset. So this was one sequence that took about 25 minutes to acquire, which is way, way longer than your average MRI takes. Usually one sequence is a couple of minutes. So because it's such a long acquisition time, the quality is way, way higher than normal. But that was absolutely necessary to achieve the desired level of accuracy for this project. So then I plugged that piece of data into a piece of open source software called 3D Slicer, where I segmented the bones and soft tissue. So that basically just means I created virtual models using the data set as a template. So I could tell the program what were my structures of interest and what wasn't. So I segmented the bones and muscles. The bones went off for printing. The muscles went into another piece of software called Unity, where we sorted out all of the interactive side of things and the tracking and all of that for the actual visualization. So this is what one kind of MRI looks like. This is one specific type of sequence. We have muscles looking pretty grey up here. Tendons are black. Bones and fat are white. And that caused a bit of drama for me when it came to segmenting, because I couldn't just rely on the greyness of the pixels to segment. And that's a problem because virtually every automatic tool that 3D Slicer provides relies on the grey levels. So when I tried to tell the computer, okay, I want bones, so I'm going to say everything that's white is bone, but it just gave me the whole foot. So I had to do extra work to tell it what was bone and what was fat. So the way I got around that was by using a tool called Fill or Grow with Seeds, where I'd really crudely paint areas in here, which were my structure of interest. So I'd tell it, yep, I want all of this structure. Every few slices, I'd paint those dots in, and then I'd paint around it and say, hey, this is not my structure of interest, with a different color. And it could work out pretty accurately as well what was my structure of interest. So that's a bone called the talus in the ankle, and what wasn't. And for the most part, it worked pretty well, but I did have to smooth it out a bit in the end, because it did give me some extrusions and intrusions that I didn't want. So I just used what's called an averaging kernel, which is like just a smoothing brush. It averages out the pixels, and I could just smooth out everything that I didn't want, all the inaccuracies. As for the muscle segmentation, that was a whole different ballgame. Shades of grey, yeah, the thresholding didn't work very well for that either. So every few slices, I would paint on the cross-section on the muscle of interest. So I'd paint it, move down a few slices, paint it again, and it would interpolate for me. I could tell it to fill in those gaps. And that is pretty much how it looked after that. So there still are some inaccuracies. You can see it kind of looks a bit fluffy, a bit spiky. So I had to do what I did with the bones and smooth it out with averaging kernels and paint in the holes myself. So that was the most time-consuming part by far. Another thing that made it super time-consuming, though, was the fact that when I studied anatomy in first year, we did not go into that much detail for a structure like the foot, for a region like the foot, I should say. We didn't go into every discrete muscle layer, so I had to refer back to my anatomy textbook for that one, which in itself took quite some time. So when it came time to print my bones, I printed it at a few different places. Zhonghua was kind enough to have contacts in all of these places. So one prototype was printed in my building in 301. Just a small one, could fit in your hand, super delicate though. There was an accident. I lost a toe. 3 models were printed in Malaysia. So one super cool flexible one was printed. You guys would have seen that one. So I'm never going to break that one. I should have brought it with me today, but unfortunately not. And I also had got 2, I think it was printed in polylactic, or PLA, polylactic acid. That's the yellow one that you guys saw. Super light, but the only problem with that is it's printed on a kind of matrix, and so, yeah, yeah, Carley drops it by accident and breaks it. No, but yeah, it's super delicate, so that has its own problems. Super light, but super delicate. I also had one other one printed in a type of resin with pins connecting to it and a base, so it was really structurally sound, really strong. Yeah, that was a good one. So that's the one here. So then we plugged it into Unity. My musculature was imported, all the virtual models were imported as assets, and for the most part of this step in my method, I used prefabs from open source packages from something called Vueforia, and the mixed reality toolkit provided by Microsoft, specifically for developing applications for the HoloLens 2. So this is where all of the interactive side of things came about. So we created the UI and buttons and all kinds of things that you can interact with, for example, to display specific layers. So if you wanted to visualize a deeper layer in the foot, but you didn't want your view to be obstructed by the superficial structures, you can turn off those superficial structures so that you get a better view. Same said for the labels. So there's like 20 or 30 odd labels. If you have them showing all at once, it's kind of overwhelming. So you can turn some of them off. And that can be really handy as well if, say, you wanted to test your knowledge. So you could turn off the labels, say, oh yes, that is flexor digitorum longus. And then you could turn the labels on and see if you got it right. So this is the model target generator. So we scanned my 3D printed model with Carley's phone using an app and imported it. And this is basically how Unity was going to decide where or the HoloLens was going to decide where my 3D printed model was. So it could track and map the soft tissue over the top and keep it superimposed regardless of where it is. So if you turn it over, it rotates as well. All of the musculature rotates as well. Yeah, so this is the program we used. So future work. one significant limitation of my project is that we only created a model of the foot and ankle. So theoretically, you could apply this approach to any other region in the body. If you wanted to do it on the knee or shoulder or hand, you could use the same method. We could also create models with movable joints, but this would require significant anatomical knowledge. So you'd have to be aware of exactly what axes the joints move in. So you don't want to be making every joint under the sun a hinge joint, because that would be wildly inaccurate. You would need really in-depth knowledge to make sure that your printed models really demonstrated how the anatomy works in real life. Another thing you would need if you took that approach was you would need to be able to animate your muscles. So as you're flexing or extending a joint, you would need to be able to make it look like those muscles are contracting and relaxing. So that would be another consideration if you took that approach. And of course, these models only included muscles, tendons, and bones. There are so many other structures around the body: fascia, nerves, vasculature. Yeah, so you would need other data sets as well, potentially, to do something like that. Maybe an angiogram if you wanted to get those blood vessels in. So yeah, that's another way we could advance this project. And the impact, we have potentially made a more accessible teaching tool, that provides an immersive, interactive learning experience. And the overarching goal is to improve learning outcomes and potentially make more knowledgeable students and health professionals. And I'd just like to say thank you to all of these lovely people, to Professor Sun for helping me with this project in general, Dr. Gupta and Mr. Harrison for providing me with the data set, Ms. Tillett out the back there for helping me with all the technical stuff, Associate Professor Lee for providing me with the laptop I've been using. I would be so lost without it. And Mr. Lim, Dr. Wong, and Mr. Duck for printing all my models. Are there any questions?